Ever since we started grade school, we've all been told that we need a big, strong government to look after us. And that, sure, it may need fixing here and there, but generally today's government size is about right. We disagree. We think that government is a parasite, living off what you and I earn and using our money to do unpleasant things to us. From being a nation of self-reliant go-getters, America is fast becoming a country of government junkies. We think an alternative exists, one that puts you back in charge of your own life and destiny. We call it the freedom alternative.
Good evening, I'm Jim Davies, and today on the Freedom Alternative, we'll bring you the second part of a fascinating discussion with Walter Gengarelli about a subject often named but seldom defined, family values. Before we join his interview by Peter Verderosa, let's quickly remind you of what we found last week. First, the highest family value is that each family should be free to select its own values. Any imposed from outside are destructive. Second, 50% death taxes destroy small family businesses and farms, forcing them into conglomerates run by friends of politicians. Third, death and burial laws take money from mourners to favor morticians. We saw that even a very simple funeral today takes $5,000 out of their hands. Fourth, bringing up children is a natural family activity, greatly injured by the government's school monopoly. State governments often prevent homeschooling, and all of them artificially double the cost of choosing a competing school. Fifth, the requirement to get a government license to marry is monstrously unjust, and we blame the clergy for failing to protest it. Sixth, it's an outrage to justice that when a couple makes a prenuptial agreement, government courts routinely override its terms. So we think family values is a matter of power, about who controls us, the individual members of families who associate by choice and control ourselves, or the government which grabs, then wastes, the wealth we produce. When next a Republican politician pleads his earnest support for family values, when all he really wants is your vote and so more power to control you, call him, won't you, a liar to his face. To me, one of Walter Gengarelli's most memorable phrases last week was that government is a natural enemy of the family. Let's go now and join him and Peter.
Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our edition of the Freedom Alternative on government's effect on the family. Our guest, Walter Gengarelli, Senior Vice President of Operations of National Aircraft Rental Systems Incorporated, a longtime member of the Libertarian Party of Connecticut, always outspoken and always with a different point of view. Walter, I'm glad to have you back.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's nice to be here.
Last week, we left off, as Jim Davies aptly pointed out, with you making reference to governments being the enemy of the family. Could you just basically recap for us?
Well, certainly. I mean, if you think about one of the main functions of the government is to control people and to have power. And of course, the family is a natural social unit of power. So in the areas of education, in the areas of what we generally term the welfare or human services factors, in the areas of work, the intent of the family can often thwart the drive for power by the government, and conversely, the government getting into certain areas diminishes the role of the family as applied to those factors.
So although the intent of legislators by their claim is good, it ends up being a negative effect.
It's almost always counterproductive. That's right.
When we began the program last week, I made a little joke and talked about the phases of our lives, that is, men and women, with the words hatch, match, and dispatch. And I learned that from a Catholic priest. I thought that was a very clever way to put it. We started from the dispatch end, if you remember.
That's
in other
correct.
words, death. We spoke a little bit about that. Then we got up to the middle part, and we left off with prenuptial agreements, which we mentioned are very seldom honored by the judiciary in the United States of America. That means all 50 states, basically. I seldom see of a case where a prenuptial agreement is honored. Why do you think the woman in every given instance is always favored?
Well, it certainly seems to turn out that way. I guess the concept, the idea of prenuptial agreements is relatively new. I mean, it's certainly no more than a century old, if that. But it just is another example of how individuals, in trying to form a family unit and in planning out the rest of their lives, are thwarted essentially by government, who may have a different idea of how people should live or how they should conduct themselves.
Would you be so bold as to say that it's hypocritical on the part of judges?
Well, it's more than hypocritical. It's nothing really more than a power grab to say, look, we want everybody to understand we are the ones who say what it is that you should, what rules you should follow in your personal conduct and in your family life. And they put their foot down. If you will, I don't want to get too religious, basically if you analyze it, atheism is the religion of the state, and the judges are their bishops. They do not like the concept of people pre-planning a life and then following that plan without any interference from the state. Mm-hmm. And you'll find you have outside interference from the state and the state's agents, which are the judges and the attorneys and the various social workers and so forth.
We'll talk about it more as we go on, but since you mentioned that, I'm going to pin you down here just for a moment. Mm-hmm. What about, we know that, and we'd like to mention, that any religious belief is integratable with libertarian ideals.
That's absolutely right. As a matter of fact, atheism is as acceptable a religious point of view as Catholicism, as I am, or Judaism, or any other religious, or even an unorganized religion. The point is, it is a religious point of view. Often people try to gloss it over and say, well, that's not religion. All the other things are religion and based on dogma, but this isn't. Well, in fact, it isn't. It's a religious point of view, just like any other.
In a previous show featuring the speech given in 1990 by Gene Burns, a radio talk show host at WRKO in Boston, very, very articulate man, full-blown libertarian in his thinking. He mentioned the Declaration of Independence, and he talked about Thomas Jefferson. The Declaration of Independence is often neglected and forgotten and left aside. But in fact, he mentioned a belief in a creator. He said, unless you believe in nature, he said you could have it either way, and that the Declaration of Independence was applicable in both areas. Now, I've heard some people say that Thomas Jefferson tore up a Bible, shredded a Bible, and yet on his deathbed, it's not certain, but he may have accepted Christianity.
Well, that's possible. Certainly among the Founding Fathers, you have the broad scope of religious views that you have even in America today. But there's no question in my mind that the approach to these issues, again, should be placed in the hands of individual families and have families make the decision about that, and not
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly how the Freedom Alternative feels, and that's the message we're trying to get across.
Yeah.
I think it was very good that we made this point that all religions are integratable with the ideology of the libertarian movement.
Absolutely, but you realize, of course, how it thwarts the direction or the intent of the family if you send your kids off to a government school where they are taught essentially, whether you like it or not, the great works of art, some of the great music, much of the great literature relates to religious views, and you take that out of the education process and eliminate it. It's ridiculous. The kids aren't getting a full education.
Right. Now, in the middle of our lives, should we choose the companionship of a mate, there are many, many areas in which the government influences that relationship. Let's take a look at some of them. We spoke before the program about the two basic aspects, one being the financial aspects of the partnership,
Right.
quote unquote. let's have you elaborate a little bit on that. What are your views as far as government's intervention in the family with regard to money matters? And I know there are many.
Well, there are many. I mean, first of all, maybe we should clarify what we're talking about. If you're talking about the family, I guess the basic family unit are the two individuals who decide to get together through some kind of an agreement and form a family. That's when sort of a new family is started. Now they have an extended family of aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins and so forth, but that's the new family unit. And they make that agreement under some premise which hopefully they decide themselves, maybe with help from their other family members who are more experienced and have had things that they can relate to them. It would be helpful. But it seems to me forming that unit and, if you will, disassembling that unit should be done in the same way. Two people mutually agreeing this is the thing to do, and later on, hopefully not, but if it happens, two people mutually agreeing this maybe wasn't the thing to do, let's go our separate ways and you know, try some other plan. Where government gets into it is in the third factor, where one person wants to go a separate way and not live up to the agreement, and the other person wants to continue to live up to that agreement. And if you investigate it, you'll find that some great amount of stress has been injected into that family unit. Usually that stress is financial, and if you trace back and see where the financial stress came from, 9 chances out of 10 is it came from some government intervention, either preventing people from working where they want to work or how they want to work, or conducting their lives in a way which they feel would bring the most benefit to themselves and their family, and find that the stress is too much, and it breaks up the family unit itself.
Mm-hmm. These financial stresses, taxation, as we've pointed out here on the Freedom Alternative, now is over 50% into our lives, into our productive monies, because of, some people think it's up until a certain day in May that we work for the government each year, but actually the Freedom Alternative has proven that it is a lot more than that, because of the fact that there are many, many hidden taxes, taxes built into the costs of goods and services that we buy. If we are, in fact, at this point, over 50% taxed, then it is obvious that the family situation is stressed to a tremendous degree, and we would like the viewers to see that and realize that. That is one of the things that's creating a situation in a marriage, for example, where the husband may have to have a part-time job aside from his regular job, and many of the wives have to work.
That's correct, and of course when both the husband and wife work, then you come into the need for child care and daycare, and that's heavily regulated by the government as to who's even allowed to take care of your children. It's a very complex and difficult situation. It doesn't make it any easier for a family. To go back to what you said about the finances, there's no question that you buy a car, the iron company that dug the raw materials out of the ground was taxed, the land the mine was on is taxed, the transportation company was taxed that bought it. So there's no question that taxes are way more than 50% of what we spend on items. And I'm amused at the fact that as quickly as people decide maybe they want to have some more choices about their life, the government steps in and takes advantage of it, or the people who seek power do. The good example is what you might term the women's liberation movement. There was a time not too long ago when women were saying, we want more rights to go out and work and do the things that we've been prevented from doing. Well, government jumped right on that. And the amusing thing is now you have a husband and wife that are working. Generally, the husband earns a little more because he's been working longer, but it could be the other way around. But the real point is that one of those people in the family unit is working not until May, but all year long for the government. If they're divided 60-40, say, in their salaries, the one that's earning 40% clearly is paying all the taxes for that family and is literally working for the government year-round. Seems to me a violation of the 14th Amendment.
And just to cap that off, I know that many women are not going to like hearing this on this program, but it could be that those who are feminists to whatever degree, if they were in support of ERA, for example, we'd like to point out that we think that they are pawns.
Well, they are pawns, but the point is, I guess you could step back not very far in history. You don't have to go back 2 centuries to have the time when most families were together and both the male and the female were in the home or near the home. I'm sure when Paul Revere pounded out his pots, he didn't commute on the train to someplace far away. He did it probably in a shop that he had in his home. And his kids had access to the father and the mother, and they were both working all day. The idea that somebody in a home isn't working is kind of a joke. But they both worked all day, but they also were there to care for the next generation. The first group to leave the home were the males when the essentially agrarian society that we had became industrialized and people went off out of the home to work. And for a while it seemed to benefit because they brought more money into the home in terms that they had greater financial resources, but something was lost, and that was the father being there to raise the children. Now the mothers are out of the home too, and there's no parent in the home to raise the children.
Once again, it's a matter of freedom of choice.
That's
a woman should have the freedom to choose whether or not she wants to be a married lady or a single, up-and-coming professional.
That's correct, and neither women nor men have the right to choose because of other government laws, like zoning laws that prevent them from working in their home if they want to, and so forth. So the level of interference is so great, we could spend hours discussing it.
And that's why, since we're running short of time,
Yeah.
I'd like to get on to the first euphemism there, the hatching, the beginning of our lives, and it's the effect of government on that. And I know that we're going to get into a very touchy area, and that is the area of abortion as we discuss this part of it. But with regard to the birth of an individual in America, there are laws in the various states regarding that birth, are there not?
That's correct, and I would say really the first step, and I'm sure all libertarians and other Americans really should concur, is we need to really get the government out of the area of making decisions about who has children, who doesn't have children, and what to do about a potential human being when they're going to be born.
One of the primary ways that they are involved in influencing the number of children that a couple will have is in fact the income tax deduction.
That's correct.
And right now there's a proposal in the Senate. I don't know if it's been voted on as yet. I imagine not at this point in time. This being, by the way, the 23rd day of July, 1991. We might want to just say that for the sake of this program's being pre-recorded. There is the Wolf Bill, which proposes that the current deduction, which is a little bit over $2,000 per dependent, be increased to $4,000. What are your views on that? What do you think that would do to the state of the society, let's say, if there were not other checks or other concessions made along with it?
Well, the interesting thing is it sounds like something that would entice people to have more children or make it easier to have children. And here you probably run into a problem of people who haven't had a family thinking this is a benefit. If you've got children, you realize there's no amount of deduction that's enough to cover all the things that you would like to be able to do for them. So this goes back probably to the concept that the taxes and the idea of the taxes in the first place are hideous. And if you think about it, again, politicians claim to be the friend of the family. If the family is indeed the most important unit of society, is it logical that the costs of operating the family all aren't deductible? I mean, you couldn't run a factory if the cost of electric for running the machines wasn't a legitimate business expense and deducted before there was any taxes paid by the factory. But if you have a family, the electric bill and to heat the home and to light the home so the kids can do homework in the evening or to run the furnace, and that's not deductible.
In essence, folks, think about what Walter is saying at this point. He is saying, in so many words, leave us alone. That's really what he's saying. And I believe that he's on to a very, very important point with regard to what we espouse here on the Freedom Alternative program. Let's take a look at that final issue that must be scrutinized, whether you like it or not, and that is the one of abortion. What are your thoughts with regard to government's intervention in that area of our lives today?
Well, I clearly think it shouldn't be government's place to be involved in that. It's a difficult enough decision for intelligent people to make without interference from an outside force that has an agenda of its own, which is really what government amounts to. I mean, governments looking to raise armies will make abortion absolutely, they'll put a death sentence on anyone performing one. And governments concerned about high population will make it extremely easy. That they have their own agenda and they should be completely out of the picture.
Mm-hmm. And here again, no matter what your religious view, this is an area where it belongs entirely in the family.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. We did want to briefly mention that there was a case of a young lady who in Indiana, where a law exists that the parents must be notified of her desire to get an abortion, she actually violated the law and went and had one, but did it in a backstreet type operation, and subsequently lost her life because of it.
Yeah, I had heard about that case, and it's extremely unfortunate, and it is clear that the government intervention in this area was a major cause in her making the decision the way she did, and therefore in her death. It's unfortunate that, one, she had to make a choice like that, and two, that again, government interference in the operation of a family left her feeling there was no one she could turn to within her family, if not her parents or grandparents or an uncle or aunt, for assistance.
Walter Gengarelli, I want to thank you very much for being our guest. Your most insightful remarks are points well taken, and I hope that everybody paid close attention.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for being with us. We're going to wrap it up now, and Jim will join us. Well, here it is, the end of July 1991, and Connecticut still has no budget. The Freedom Alternative would like to make some comments on the issue at this time. Are you a worker with an annual income of $12,500 or less? Are you a person who works for government? Are you a senior citizen? Or are you the owner of a small business? What all of you may have in common, especially as we approach the end of July, is the belief that a state income tax is the only way to cure Connecticut's money problems. But look at each of your special interests that make you extremely vulnerable to the intimidating words of politicians. For example, if you're a low-income worker, you're probably saying, yeah, Representative Stolberg is right. At my level of pay, I won't be taxed at all. But it will make those rich dudes pay their fair share. Wrong. The rich won't even care, while the middle and upper middle income earner, whose special abilities, I might add, make your job possible, will be hit in the critical area of available spendable income. Those few extra dollars that are now spent in the productive private sector that won't be there anymore to make your job necessary. You'd better give that some serious thought. Next, let's look at you, the government worker. Your job is on the line whenever government spends more than it takes in, which, by the way, is all the time. With all due respect, I think you have to take a hard look at your department's function. Do you see waste? Is your function paid for by all citizens to satisfy the wants of a few? Would you be able to get the same salary plus benefits for the same hours in private sector business? If you applied for your job to enjoy security knowing you'd be shielded by the government employees union, you'd better think twice. Devices like binding arbitration are almost never found in private sector business. Why? Because the entire economy would quickly collapse under such schemes. And how about the senior citizen? Now you're an easy target for the politician because you've got real fears in the autumn of your life. You've fallen for the idea that an income tax is the only way to avoid taxing your already dropping dividend and interest income. What you have to do is simply see the truth, that any additional tax whatsoever is going to ultimately hurt you, not help or spare you. Your interest income from private sector investments will rise. It'll actually go up if government and all its current functions are drastically cut. Finally, let's talk to you, the small business owner. Many of you have been swayed by the governor and others into thinking that the only alternative to additional taxes that will discourage business, including an expanded state sales tax, is an income tax. And the kicker is that the news media feeds you this garbage relentlessly. Stop and think for yourself. There is an answer that will bring short-term hardship for some, but long-term prosperity, opportunity, and responsibility for all of us. Scream as loudly as you can for absolutely no additional taxes and a vast reduction in government. Just look in the blue pages of your telephone directory and express it to your legislators today.
We on the Freedom Alternative favor any and all reduction in taxes because we can visualize the practical alternative of a peaceful, harmonious, and prosperous society that has no taxes at all. Any progress in that direction is therefore welcome, and any effort to prevent the opposite must be applauded. As we have before, though, we have to point out that the Republican-led alternative to the Weicker Democrat proposed state income tax is not exactly a knight in shining armor. It, too, involves huge tax increases. So we don't offer these people 3 cheers, 1 cheer at the most. We think that all of the Hartford mob love the idea of a state income tax because it makes it so much easier to take more of our money. We think that even those who say they oppose it are lying, that they simply want to avoid being blamed for it by the voters. The decision being allegedly debated in Hartford is whether to steal $7,400 a year from the average Connecticut family with help from an income tax, or whether to steal only about $7,000 without it. Some choice. This difference is so small that we think that all of the politicians in Hartford are posturing. We doubt that a single one of them from either major party has any true belief that taxes must be minimized because they're evil. We think that the only reason any of them are there is because they love the exercise of power, and power needs money, tax money, to feed it. Of course, I may be wrong. I don't know each of them at all. Just recently, in the state of New Hampshire, just such an exception to that general rule did come to light. Here's a report of it in the Freedom Network News. New Hampshire State Legislator Calvin Warburton is officially resigning from the Republican Party and becoming a registered member of the U.S. Libertarian Party. Warburton, a 7-term member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives, remarked recently, "The Republicans have been responsible for raising taxes and are negotiating with the Democrats over some form of broad-based state tax. I don't want people to read my lips. I want them to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I will vote against new taxes." Is there, I wonder, a single Connecticut legislator from either of those two parties with a conscience like Mr. Warburton's? And might he or she secretly be watching this program? If there is such an honest legislator, let him or her make use of this number, 1-257-4844. Let him contact us with a view to doing in Connecticut what Mr. Warburton did in New Hampshire. We libertarians will make nothing public until he or she is ready. We'll be waiting to hear whether, despite all appearances, there is as many as one single honest politician in Hartford.
Until next week, and another edition of the Freedom Alternative, a very pleasant week to you, and good night, everybody.
Good night.